Hey guys, welcome. We want to thank y'all for joining us. We're going to try to put out some good information about MPS. We talk about providing hope, and that's exactly what this discussion is for, to give you current information about MPS 1. I'm going to let everyone introduce themselves, give a quick synopsis, and then we'll get into discussion. So, Mark, if you don't care to just start us off real quick.
Sure. I'm Mark Dant. I am Ryan's dad. Our son Ryan was diagnosed with MPS 1 way back in 1991, before there was much science at all. There was transplant, but transplant had not been in at around that long. So Ryan was diagnosed at 3.5 years old, so that was kind of out of the picture as well. We worked very hard volunteering to learn more about MPS and to meet other wonderful families and wonderful places like the University of Minnesota, which was the very first place we came after Ryan was diagnosed to get the best answers we possibly could find. We found those answers, which provided us hope. So we started a foundation called the Ryan Foundation with a bake sale that raised $342. Got better at raising funds like you guys are doing, and like so many families across the nation are doing, to move science forward. And we found Dr. Emil Kakis working at a small Quonset hut behind the county hospital at UCLA. And he developed enzyme replacement therapy, the first ERT for any MPS disorder, right out of that little small building. Ryan's now the longest treated person in the world on an ERT for MPS disease, and he just had a birthday, same as Ryan's birthday, this past Sunday, April 13th. He turned 37. So he's also had intrathecal enzyme replacement to help cognitive decline. He's doing quite well, all because of the hope of science and the value of working together as a family, using your voice to make a change. So that's our story.
Thank you, Mark.
I'm Paul Orchard. I'm a pediatrician, trained in hematology, oncology, blood marrow transplantation. So I've been here at Minnesota for well over 30 years. The University of Minnesota was very interested in treating patients that had MPS and other rare disorders. The first place to do a transplant actually for an MPS disorder here back in 81, I want to say. I wasn't quite here then. But it's still been a commitment of the group to best care for these patients as we can. And there's been a lot of evolution in terms of how transplant has been utilized for these diseases. That in the old days, if you didn't have a brother or sister who was a match, you couldn't get transplanted. And now we have a lot of different possibilities in terms of finding grafts and donors, so that the safety of transplant has improved substantially over the years. Still some ways to go. And we're also very interested in new therapies that are coming down the pike, including gene therapies. And we've got 2 protocols open right now for gene therapy here at Minnesota. One for the kids that are newly diagnosed and another for the attenuated patients, so the adults. So we're just trying to move the field forward and make things as safe and efficacious as we can.
Awesome. Thank you. So we're Ryan and Allie Ladd. We're co-founders of the Kennedy Ladd Foundation. We have 2 kids with MPS 1 Hurler syndrome. Once we got into the MPS world and community and everything, we found Mark through that, who has been a great mentor to us and led us to starting the Kennedy Ladd Foundation, helping us get that off the ground. And so since then, we've been hitting the ground running. Like I said, we got 2 kids, Kennedy and Lincoln. They're 10 and 7. Both had bone marrow transplants at Cincinnati Children's Hospital in Cincinnati, Ohio. And through all the community and services and everything, we found Dr. Paul Orchard at the University of Minnesota. And so he's invited us up to the MPS conference here, and we're very excited and very honored to be here. So thank you for that.
We are excited to have you here.
And so we've just had great mentors. I say all that to say that we think the world of these 2 guys right here. So we're very happy to sit down and have a conversation.
We really just want to be able to provide other people hope. We kind of went through the bone marrow transplant process, and then as we were home and try to figure out what life was going to be like, and started the nonprofit that, like Brian said, how we got in touch with Mark. And we just got involved with community, and we've seen the needle move and things change. Mark's moved the needle, but just our little splash that as we've shared our story, we see things changing, and we really just want to be able to encourage you all to get involved, to have information of things that are coming up and getting better, just to give you the hope to tell your story and also be a part of the movement and change for MPS 1.
So the meaning of this meeting is, we were told, I don't know how about you, Mark, with everything going on, back whenever Ron was diagnosed, but don't Google it. That's the biggest statement that is made. So we're going to have a discussion of we want to put good information, current information on Google. We want that to make it out there. We hope this video makes it out there. So we want you to be able to Google it and find the hope in MPS rather than vice versa. So we're going to have a discussion about what's going on. And I'll let one of you all kick it off about, so 30 years ago, bad information, dated, not good treatment options, correct? But pretty true statement, I guess, is what you would say.
Yes, I think that nailed it. And I love the way you say everyone here is don't Google it, because it really is true. And if I were a physician, which we're not in in that realm, I would say the same thing, because all of us realize that Google's going to give you the worst of the worst, and if it's put out there today, tomorrow it's dated. And when you're a brand new diagnosed mom and dad, you don't need yesterday's news. You need what's going to happen today and what to look for tomorrow. Google's not going to tell you that. When Ryan was diagnosed, I'm just going to date myself, because you probably thought I'm the same age.
Yeah,
I'm probably.
Don't go to the library.
I'm sure your viewers are going. Allie and Ryan and Mark probably all the same age. Why's it looking right? Yeah, okay.
had me.
See, thank you, Doc. He's a good guy. There was no Google. This was before the Google machine was invented. So we were told that Ryan would pass away by the time he was 10, 15 at the most. He may be severe, even though he looked pretty good, but he was diagnosed at 3.5. So that's pretty young, even as an attenuated. So we would just have to wait and see. And it was too late for transplant, because even back then, she mentioned, so that would be 10 years after the first transplant here. Ryan was too old for transplant, because at that time it was thought 24 months is probably the cutoff. Ryan was over 3.5. So our only hope was, there was none. We were told that there would be never any company investment into MPS because it's too rare. There's no business model built to support ultra-rare disease like ours. And there was very little science, because other than transplant, and the percentages were not good at the time, like Dr. Orchard mentioned, there would be no hope. So I did spend all my time in the public library trying to understand the language of science, the language that you use as a physician scientist, but also understand what was in the future. Everything written there was written yesterday. So I learned early on, do a lot of homework, because the more you know, the more you can find hope.
I agree with that 100%. And so we were told the same thing, even, let's see, that was 91, and Kenny was transplanted in 2015. So 24 years later, we were told the same thing. 2 years of age is kind of your cutoff. Is that still current? Would you say that's current information?
No, I don't think we'd use a hard cutoff like that anymore. I think there's opportunities to do things that we didn't have when some of those recommendations were made. So, and you know, one of the key things now, of course, is the newborn screening sort of realm. So it used to be that kids weren't diagnosed until they were sufficiently symptomatic that they were going to end up having some problem that led them to go see a geneticist and have the testing done. But now, I don't know what the percentage of states are. It's probably about 40 of the 50 states, maybe it's a little more than that now, are actually screening, you know, kids as they're born, and so you can pick it up before they have any sort of manifestations of the disease. And it makes a huge difference, because it's much easier to prevent problems than it is to try to reverse them once you've got issues. So it's made a huge difference for those of us that are trying to intervene as early as we can, because it's absolutely clear that that makes a difference. So, you know, what's the survival now? Well, maybe we should even back up a little bit. So we kind of talked about this a little bit, but MPS 1 is kind of a continuum. So the severely affected kids are the Hurler kids. And then we used to talk about Shea and Hurler-Shea, but, you know, there's no clear dividing line for those things. So the attenuated kids tend not to have a lot of neurocognitive issues. And so most of those kids then go on enzyme and stay on enzyme. And the kids that have a Hurler, or severe mutations essentially, are likely to develop neurocognitive decline as they get to be older. And that's one of the huge things we want to try to prevent. So the enzyme therapy that's available doesn't penetrate into the brain very well, so it doesn't treat the central nervous system. But some donor-derived cells, if you do a bone marrow transplant, So the blood cells from the donor will make their way into the brain and provide source of enzymes. So the big fork in the road kind of right now is that if you have severe disease, you have Hurler, you may go on a transplant pathway. And if you have attenuated disease, we're not really worried about the neurocognitive aspects of the disease. Most of those kids go on enzyme and stay on enzyme. So that's kind of the big, dividing line in terms of how we approach the kids. But that's going to get muddied as we have more opportunities. And it's good that we're going to have more opportunities to treat the kids. But that's kind of historically where things have been.
Before we move into the new enzyme replacement therapies and gene therapies that's coming on to the market, Allie, correct me, but whenever Kennedy was going through transplant in 2015, we told there was about a 60%-ish success rate that she would make it through transplant, 40-ish that, she wouldn't, and pass away just through the transplant process. Is that still, give or take, would you say, percentages, or...
No, I mean, it's much better than that now. It depends to some degree on how good a match you can find. I mean, the gold standard has been a brother or sister who's a match that, doesn't have Hurler and isn't a carrier. Although there's some debate as to how much difference that kind of makes if you're a carrier or not. But that was the gold standard. But there's 30 million people that have been HLA typed and be considered as a donor. Those are the unrelated donor kind of adult pool. And there's hundreds of thousands of cord bloods that are now available. So as babies are born, there's a lot of blood stem cells in a placenta. And so those have been HLA typed and set aside as potential units that we can use for kids that need to get transplanted. So our ability to match donors is much better than it used to be. And that makes a big difference. Our chemotherapy is now quite tightly controlled, and those types of things make a difference as well. And if you pick up the kids earlier and you're not worried about their cardiac status or pulmonary status quite so much, that makes a difference too. So ordinarily, if you've got an otherwise healthy Hurler kid and they've got a good donor, you kind of say 10-15% mortality rate now, something like that. That's been our experience more recently. So it's still higher than we would like it to be, but that's generally what I would tell people now.
It's a lot better than what we were told. A lot better.
And how many years difference is that again, Wayne?
Kennedy was in 2015, so 10 years ago. Yeah, that's...
And I think what that screams to the point is science is constantly evolving, and procedures are constantly evolving and improving. So when Ryan was diagnosed, transplant really was very, very severe. And even our diagnosing physician said, even if Ryan was younger, I would really caution you about considering transplant, because even at 10 years, it was so new, and the chemotherapy and radiation at the time was used, because that was the best science had to offer. 10 years since Kennedy was transplanted, and so much has changed that the percentages have gone up drastically. It's not without risk, and we don't want to say that at all.
Yeah.
But this constant evolution of science also provides hope. Partnering with that, that's what's so exciting about this, what's happening in the next couple of days because of your team here, Dr. Orchard, is newborn screening really does provide hope. And that's what I hope everyone who leaves here can understand. What they're giving this generation is hope, because the sooner you can get involved, the better the outcome.
I think it's dramatically different than it kind of used to be. So we're really, really excited about being able to have transplant to offer what some of these other, that we'll probably get to, some of these other opportunities to treat the patients too. So, I come from an oncology background, and in a lot of circumstances, there's no magic bullet for those things. So sometimes combination therapy is much better than a single, entity, and we may end up going that direction for the MPS disorders as well.
From our lived experience for that, between Kennedy and Lincoln, just the 9-month difference in diagnosis. Kennedy wasn't diagnosed until she was 9 months old, and Lincoln was diagnosed as a newborn, and their life and their quality of life is night and day, extremely different. Lincoln today is 7, and by the time Kennedy was 7, she had had her spine fused. She had had 2 bone marrow transplants, lots of therapies, lots of mobility assistance and AFOs and different things. And Lincoln to date has none of that. So we have lived the power of newborn screening and the power of early diagnosis.
Yeah, I mean, you look now to date, Kennedy's had 2 big major surgeries, like the double hip, double knee, double ankle, and Achilles tendon release surgery all at once. And then her spine surgery. And to date, Lincoln has had a hernia surgery. He had 2 hernias removed, and that's a repair. That's it. And so just that difference. Now, I don't know if, and you can speak on this, Kennedy, she had her first transplant failed, which I know contributed to it, but we spent 111 days in the hospital with Kennedy, and we were in 64 days, 60-something days with Lincoln. And just that difference right there of 2 months, was huge for us. We went in with Lincoln expecting to be there for 6 months, and we got out in 2. So,
Well, transplant might be the best thing we've got to offer for the severely affected kids, but it's, as you guys know better than almost anybody, it's no walk in the park. And, it's totally disruptive for the family. You're away from home a lot of times for months at a time. There's complications. You end up sleeping in the hospital, and, you can't get your clothes washed or get the trip to Target or whatever. And it's a huge, big deal for the families. It's incredibly disruptive. So we do what we can to try to minimize that, but it's a tough process.
And just to clear, so that the viewers know too, neither one of your children had a sibling transplant as a donor.
That's correct. They are both cord blood.
Which is phenomenal because, again, the progression of science. Last year, I had the honor of attending one of your fundraisers, the wiffle ball tournament, which was really, if you ever get to Tennessee, you should go. It was a fun day. I got to see a lot of MPS 1 kids along their journey. And I saw Lincoln, it was his birthday, right? Birthday week. So everybody saying birthday. He was running around with his shirt off the majority of the day.
No shoes. No shoes.
I mean, I'm from Kentucky, so that's normal. This is like Tennessee. I was so impressed and so amazed that this young fella has MPS 1. His transplant was so phenomenally good. The outcome is just remarkable. But it wasn't easy, right?
No, it wasn't. And, that's, maybe you have this answer. So kids are, and I'm sure it's some genetics and a possibility, but, we see Lincoln, how good he is that was transplanted, very early, 3 months of age. But we've spoke with other families that have been transplanted early, and they may have a little bit more complications. Is that for any reason other than genetics, or maybe not as good of a match, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think how much enzyme you're getting may play a role, but it seems like there's a fair amount of variability. We got several families that may have 2 or even 3 kids that are affected. And, one of them may have tremendous kyphosis and need to have back surgery, and then the sibling doesn't really have that much as a problem. So, I don't know, there's got to be other variables that we don't really appreciate that influence some of these things. So it'd be nice to be able to sort some of that out. But, yeah, there's a fair amount of variability, even with the same mutations in the same family in terms of what kind of disease-related manifestations they have.
Can I ask a question about newborn screening? For all the families that are just diagnosed and they have MPS 1, they're told, okay, through the system, your infant is just a few weeks old, maybe a month, and we're sending it to Dr. Orchard to talk about training. What is the youngest patient, infant that your center is transplanting?
Oh, boy, I don't know. I'd have to go back and look. A couple months.
A couple of months. That's just wonderful news for our MPS 1 families because of the experience that your family has already. Yeah. The difference in just a few months. And the cognitive differences, what your data will probably show from a long-term perspective, the outcomes of the earlier transplanted compared to later transplanted with cognition later on in life, in their teens and their 20s now, is probably remarkably different.
Yeah, no, I think that's a huge aspect of what we're trying to accomplish. So, and just so people know, most of the kids are born, their cognition is normal. but over time they tend to slow down in terms of their development, and then they actually fall further and further behind their peers. So that's one of the big things that we're trying to alleviate. And being able to transplant the kids early makes the data's clear. It makes a huge difference in that. So again, newborn screening is a key aspect of being able to identify that and to treat those kids effectively.
So the time that the child is spent in the womb is, you don't think there's any decline during that time, or?
Well, I wish I could tell you that. I mean, there are certainly kids that are born that have a kyphosis when they're born, right? So they've got skeletal sorts of problems. Trying to sort out exactly where a kid is neurocognitively when they're a couple weeks old is pretty hard. So, I defer that to some of our colleagues to help sort those kinds of pieces out. But at least, out to a few months of age and maybe 6 months, it looks like the kids that are severely affected with Hurler are still pretty close to their peers. But, it takes a little while after transplant to get the donor cells circulating through the body and potentially get them into the brain and hopefully deliver enough enzyme that you're not going to have progression. So, again, the timing really ends up being important.
And you're seeing enzyme in CSF after transplant at how many months?
Well, so this is one of the
cerebrospinal fluid.
Yes, yeah. So
8 acronyms.
CSF or spinal fluid enzyme has been really hard to measure. So we don't have a great way of sorting that piece out. Mm-hmm. There are the substrates or the accumulating materials like glycosamine glycans or the GAGs that we kind of talk about. Those are easier to measure in the spinal fluid than the actual enzyme pieces.
But you see a CSF GAG heparan sulfate reduction at what age?
Well, it's interesting because even in the kids that are treated with a little bit of enzyme up front, it looks like it starts to come down.
Wow!
But it comes down further after transplant. So we don't tend to do a lot of spinal taps. So we usually do one before the kids get treated, and then maybe at 6 months and a year and 2 years, and so we can kind of map those things out. But yeah, it's quite clear that those GAGs come down in the spinal fluid associated with the therapy. So those are the complex sugars that build up because you don't have the iduronidase enzyme there for those that are watching. So that's the GAG people talk about, and there's a bunch of different kinds of GAGs, and you can kind of look at various different ones, but so that gets kind of complex. But looking at the GAGs is an important parameter for both in the blood but in the spinal fluid too.
So there's been a transition with an evolution of bone marrow transplant, getting better, dialing down exact medications and chemo, and figuring out that right formula. I know it's different for every child, but as your oldest patient, what would you do? You have an idea of what the age of anyone with MPS I Hurler is?
Well, we got some of the kids that are in their 30s now, so it's not a lot of those, but we certainly have some of those kids. So, but what we used to do 30 years ago was a lot different than what we kind of currently do. And as I think Mark mentioned, I used radiation back then. So the chemotherapy and the transplant regimens that we used were based on what we did for leukemics, because we just borrowed that from what we used for the kids that had leukemia, because we knew that it kind of worked. But there you're trying to get rid of leukemia as well as just to get the donor cells in, and don't really have to try to eliminate the leukemia. So we've been trying to dial that back as best we can and still be able to effectively get the donor cells in. So that's kind of the fine tuning we've been trying to do over the last couple decades, really.
So in that time frame, the earlier kids that were transplanted versus where you kind of dialed in, are you seeing a lot better outcome for those kids? And where I'm getting at is, a lot of this information is dated, and so we're trying to provide that hope and good. So we were initially told 5 to 10 years of age is how long our kids would live, and then without treatment, and they would probably pass away. Even with treatment, we're looking at prolonging that a little bit. So now that that's more dialed in, transplants better, all the above, are you seeing better outcomes for those kids that are getting into their late teens, 20s, since the transplant process has got better?
Well, when you talk about outcomes, there's a whole different, there's a lot of different things to look at. I mean, survival is certainly one of those. But as I mentioned, we got patients that are out, in their 30s. And we didn't start doing it that long ago where we have people that are 50 or 60 because we haven't been doing transplant that long. And, there's still patients that were dying, 20 years out, 25 years out. But I don't know if that's going to be true for the patients that are treated now, because we've got this, several decade lag time to try to figure out what the outcomes are going to be. But survival is one set of issues, but the neurocognitive piece is one, and then all the orthopedic related problems are another disease related set of manifestations that we need to figure out how to better impact, essentially. Because as you know, kids get hip problems and knee problems and back problems and carpal tunnel issues and all those other kinds of things. So not everybody does, but those are the things that we follow the kids for and try to anticipate when they're going to need to have something done.
So what's interesting for me is an old person looking back. So when Ryan was diagnosed in 91, there still were a good number of patients with MPS I Hurler whose families chose not to transplant because the percentages were so difficult and the process was so difficult. It was even hard at that time to look forward 5 years and see what your child would look like. So we all know our infants when they're born are just beautiful. But without treatment for MPS I became really close friends with a family from California and a couple other families across the nation who chose not to transplant. And it is just a remarkably horrible disease without transplant. So first off, you are honored for a reason. You changed that completely forever. I don't see patients in the U.S. anymore with who haven't been transplanted with MPS I, and the outcomes are so much better. But if you've traveled globally, I've had the opportunity to do that. They're still there, and it is horrible. And everything you see on Google is true without an intervention from someone like yourself.
Well, so when you're kind of comparing, because there was a group of families that, started in transplant in the 80s. Aldurazyme became available in 2003, I want to say. So, we had 2 decades worth almost of transplant-related experience. And, those risks were significant. And, a lot of kids died going through transplant. So it's understandable that some of the families decided, I don't want to do that. Now we've got enzyme, let's do this. But if you look at the survival of the kids that were treated with Hurler that got enzyme and compared it to transplant, even with the transplant mortality, survival is better with transplant than it is going on enzyme. So it seems like it gives you better correction. So, I mean, this is kind of one of the things. You may get a little better correction with transplant, but the risk is higher.
Yeah.
And so that's what you're kind of playing off each other. And the calculation for the attenuated patients is probably makes sense just to stay on enzyme. And for the kids that have severe disease, the calculation probably better off getting transplanted. So, but again, those things may, the mix of that might change down the road as we have new things to look at.
Well, since you brought that up, let's hit on that.
Let's try to tee that up a little.
Yeah, we got a few minutes. We got a few minutes left, and that is it. So let's talk about the new therapies. We got some possible enzyme replacement therapies that are coming, and we've got the new gene therapy trial going on currently here. So let's go ahead and hit on those few things.
Have you been involved with the JCR Denali enzyme therapies at all?
I have been a bit, yes, and I've had a lot of conversations with Emisoft on what's going on here.
Good.
Yes. So as Dr. Orchard mentioned, 2003 was MPS-1's ERT, Aldurazyme was approved. Just phenomenal change for the attenuated population, and oftentimes in transplant. Are they still pre-treating with at some universities with ERT for a while, or is it?
We certainly are. I think most places are, not all of them, but so generally, if we identify a baby that's probably going to go on a transplant pathway, they go on enzyme, and it helps them, I think, feel better. It may help their airways a little bit. Nobody's shown a statistical difference in terms of outcomes, but a lot of families say it's a different kid than 6 weeks ago before we started enzyme. So generally, we do enzyme up through the transplant and then release for some span of time after. It's a whole other set of questions. Some families have decided to stay on enzyme for a longer period of time to see if you can get better correction. And I'm certainly open to that. I don't have a lot of data to say that it makes a huge difference. We haven't really formally studied it, but that's one possibility kind of as well.
So the next generation of ERTs is to cross the blood-brain barrier that Dr. Orchard mentioned, because the current standard of care, Aldurazyme, does not, and it will not ever. It just won't cross. There's a lot of scientific reasons for that. Too long to discuss here, but it's not going to happen. So the next generation has technology. Denali has it. Will hopefully be approved for MPS II by the end of the year, where an ERT will treat the brain. And JCR has both programs for MPS I and MPS II, where they will cross the blood-brain barrier and treat the brain. And ImmuSoft is a very interesting approach as well, that you can probably get scientifically better.
Sure.
I could.
Yeah, so those new enzymes essentially have an antibody stuck to the end of it molecularly, and that helps the enzyme cross through the blood-brain barrier and get back into the central nervous system better. So those are kind of second generation enzymes. The gene therapy study that we've got two, but the gene therapy study that we've been doing for the newly diagnosed Hurler kids relies on what we've known for transplant using a donor. But rather than using those cells to provide enzyme, we take the kid's own blood stem cells out, and those are engineered with a virus in the laboratory to put a functioning copy of the hyaluronidase gene in. So you still have to kind of go through the transplant, in that you get chemotherapy to wipe out your cells that aren't making enzymes, so you can replace them with the cells that are. But the chemotherapy is less intense. You don't have to use immune suppression. There's a lot of complications that can result from the immune system's fighting after a regular transplant. So it's much easier to do the gene therapy. And then, at least from what we're seeing in some of the early kids, is their enzyme levels are very high. And that hopefully will give us better correction, actually, too. So that study's still ongoing. It's not licensed therapy. It's still considered experimental, so it's not readily available, which is part of the problem, essentially. But that's kind of exciting. The ImmuSoft approach is a little bit different in that you take the patient's own B cells out rather than stem cells. And the B cells are the ones that make antibody, and they can make a ton of protein. And so we're engineering those with a little different process, and then giving those back to the kids, well, adults for now, hopefully kids later. And then the idea is to have those B cells make a lot more enzyme than they could otherwise make, and hopefully we'll get better corrections in that situation too. So that trials, we just treated our second patient 3 weeks ago, something like that. Mm-hmm. So we'll see. But yeah, so a little bit different approaches, but gene therapy options may be significantly safer than what we used to do with allotransplant, and maybe they'll work better. So that's the hope.
So the one thing, when we hear virus as lay people, we get concerned thinking virus is bad. But in the library, in the Google machine, will teach you that a virus is disarmed, so it doesn't make you sick like in the viruses that we know of. A disarmed virus, like a lentivirus or an AAV virus, the part that makes you sick is taken out, and then the good stuff's stuck in for us.
Right. Yeah, you got to cut the guts out of the virus so it can't reproduce itself, essentially, and you put in the gene that you want. So, because virus is pretty good at getting into cells, so that's.
And there have been approvals in other diseases, which is so exciting for us in that, so the proof of concept actually has already been approved. MLD with Orchard?
Yeah, MLD got approved March of last year. So that's There's a fair amount of data in terms of that. It looks safer and more efficacious than what we can do with transplant. So maybe similar for MPS one, but it's kind of early to say.
So it sounds like this is going to be the next way. We've went through old transplant, old way. Kids were diagnosed early, transplants better. Now kids are being diagnosed at newborn screening, and so they're transplanted even earlier. Now it sounds like we're moving into the next wave, which is new enzyme therapies, gene therapies, which are even better than our current treatment options. Would you say that's a true statement?
Yeah, I think it's more arrows in the quiver, really. I mean, it's kind of hard to know. These things have to get approved. So you have to run the clinical trials and get all the data. Then the FDA's got to review that, and then they, make a decision whether it should be approved or not. So it's a long, drawn-out process. But some of the, like JCR has got one of the second-generation enzyme. That's the Hunter enzyme is approved in Japan, I think. Yes. So, safety piece looks like it's okay. Yeah. But we'd have to run the trials, I think, in the U.S. to be able to present that to the FDA, get approval. So it's an exciting time. I mean, for a long time, all we had was transplant, and then we had transplanted enzyme, and now there's getting to be a number of different things we might be able to offer.
Even more options than the free we were gave whenever we were diagnosed. So my last question, because we do need to wrap it up. What was your opinion that a family newly diagnosed, I guess question A of that is, where do you advise them to go? Yes, they're going to go to Google, but where do you advise them to go to get better information? And number two, once they figure out their path forward, how can they get involved and help move the needle to further us to a cure for MPS one or better treatment options?
Can I start with
It's not fair, but pass it out.
It's going to sound like I'm tooting your own horn, but even back at the beginning for Ryan, we were thrown into MPS like everybody else. I've never heard of it. I am not a physician or a scientist, and I never will be. But I found the University of Minnesota because I knew what we needed was information that I could trust. The most important thing about a physician-patient partnership is that both have to trust each other. And we found trust at the University of Minnesota from multiple physicians, not just knowing that what would be best for Ryan, but Ryan would have health issues where he would have heart issues, and he would have skeletal issues, and he would have neurocognitive issues. The people in Minnesota see MPS more than anywhere else in the nation. There are good transplant centers, a few, not very many, frankly. And that's one note I would say. Another thing about the University of Minnesota is I would guess that you've done more transplants for MPS than any other condition or any other facility in the nation. Experts are here for a reason. So I think the most important thing is find the right physicians and the facilities who can give you right information and do corrective surgeries when needed. And this would be the place that we have gone, and so many other families have gone. What to do, what can you do as a newly diagnosed family? Find your base to where you're okay for a while. And then use your voice, just like you two have done. You picked up the ball and you've done phenomenal because your voice can change. It's not just for Kennedy and Lincoln. We all think it is. But what we can do now, Gene and I can look back and say, we used our voice in 1992 when we started the foundation with a silly little bake sale. None of it meant anything at the moment. But all the things you'll look back in 20 years, you'll see something and say, I didn't think that meant anything, but look what it did. The next generation's lives will change because of the work you're doing today. And believe me, it's true. So find your base and then open up and say something.
Yeah, I would say, finding useful information can be challenging. The general pediatricians, these are 1 in 100,000 sort of diagnoses. So there's 4 million kids born in the U.S. a year, so there's 40 of these. So your general pediatricians, the vast majority have never seen a kid with Hurler. They've done over, I think, 250 transplants for the Hurler kids kind of over the years. So, there's times we got 2 or 3 kids in the hospital that have Hurler. So, we've got that benefit of just being able to see a lot of the kids. So our eye guys and the cardiologists and the orthopods and, everybody's committed to taking care of the kids. So I'm happy to, help if people have questions, but the MPS Society is a good place to go too. I mean, those guys got to know who's doing what, where, and if you want to have kind of a third-party group to explore options or what you might think about doing, I encourage people to do that. We publish a lot on outcomes in these patients, but it's in the scientific literature, and it's not something that families are likely to. But maybe with AI, I don't know. Maybe people can ask the right questions, and that will screen through actually the data and be able to provide that to you. I hadn't really thought about that till just now, but otherwise, yeah, it's hard to get kind of at that sort of data. So, it is kind of a challenge for the families, I think, to sort through what's really going to happen and what the risks are and what the life is going to look like 10, 20, 30 years down the road. But we're happy to help however we can.
So not to blow up Dr. Orchard's email, but I mean, really the same, just getting with somebody that is educated. I think we were lucky that we started with Cincinnati Children's and they were kind of knowledgeable in bone marrow transplant. But then once we came and experienced the University of Minnesota and Dr. Orchard's work and just his personality too, his true heart for the disease, it really led us into everything else. And as I talk to newly diagnosed families, a lot of times that's what I hear, is just overwhelmed in what unexperienced people are telling them. And I'm like, oh, I could just get them the knowledge. I mean, the education, the diagnosis is powerful, but the education and the resources are powerful. And I think just kind of showing them a plan so what they know what their next step is. So on top of reaching out to Dr. Orchard, I think that, again, the National MPS Society has a lot of good information. I think it becomes overwhelming because, again, where do you start? I think it's hard to say get connected. We try to tell the families to get connected, but just they get in these groups and the overwhelm again of they are grieving something they don't know that they'll ever have to grieve, or they see kids that were transplanted 20, 30 years ago, or they see kids that didn't have transplant. And so they kind of lose that sense of hope. And so I think getting connected with the educated people, getting connected with the centers, even if you're not transplanted or you don't have treatment at the University of Minnesota, I think it's valuable to talk to somebody that's educated in it, been through the experience, and can give you some advice and some direction. And again, to use your voice, like Mark said, there's so many times, it's just now really kind of full circle for us. I mean, 10 years ago, we said making these crazy YouTube videos, and it's like 1 o'clock in the morning, we're arguing, why are we doing this? And then you had 2 kids and you kind of fall off the bandwagon and you don't hear anything about it. But now we are 7 years later, and families are reaching out like, we've watched all your YouTube videos, thank you so much. Like, one mom's like, I couldn't even get out of bed. My mom was literally coming to take care of me. I didn't know what my child was, gonna look like or be like. And then I saw your kids, and your kids have friends, and your kids go to school, and your kid was playing baseball. Your kid was talking. And so it gave me hope to get up and get out of bed. So I don't know, the OneDriver, I think that's one thing we need to work on, is like, what is that sheet of paper to give people hope or to take the next step? But telling your story from the very beginning sounds weird. Sitting in those meetings, hearing all the jargon, the medical jargon that doesn't make sense. But again, it may be 5 years from now or 20 years from now, and you're like, that's why I was in that meeting, or that's why I showed up that day, or that's why I listened to that podcast. It does come full circle, and really, you only know what you know, and education is powerful, and it's the key to success.
Absolutely.
Oh, I want to mention the Candy Life Foundation. I mean, we don't have a lot of resource on there, but we are willing, like Dr. Orchard, to be, a contact or a first connection or just a sounding board. And even sometimes you hear something now, I think, again, like I said, especially with newborn families, you're with a postpartum mom, maybe it's her first time baby. She's very overwhelmed. She hears something on a Monday, doesn't mean anything, but by Thursday night, she's ready to kind of process it. And so just reach out, send that email, even if it's 10 o'clock at night, or send that text to somebody, and Don't be afraid to ask the questions, because it all feels dumb in the beginning because you don't know anything. But there are no dumb questions.
So I think it's really helpful to have other families to talk to, because rather than try to, communicate with us, it's that, somebody told me my kid should have a sleep study. Why would I do that? Is who's gone through this? What's it like? That kind of thing. And that could be valuable, I think, for families really to understand what other families that have gone through it have experienced.
So true.
I think you guys are a huge potential resource to get people connected to others that have been there.
I mean, that's where I'm at. Find your community, and speak to them. We talked about the waves. So you've got yours on this end of the spectrum. You've got the other ones on this end of the spectrum. So find where you're at in those waves and stick closer to that. I mean, there's, just like Google, there's some bad information in these groups in the community that negatively, because of what they've experienced 20 or 30 years ago. And so I would say within the community, respect those people, but also figure out, that was a different time and place and everything of that nature. So with that, I hope that this video has provided some light in this darkness of this, diagnosis. It's like Mark mentioned, it's not easy, no matter what you do. But you have great people that have moved the needle, just like these two gentlemen. And all across the country, there's more working. We know that behind the scenes, not just in this room, but reach out to us. I'll put all the contacts of everybody on the screen. I know Mark would be more than happy, Dr. Orchard as well.
The general world, you talk about reaching out to a doctor, it's intimidating. They don't have a direct contact. You have all these barriers to get to somebody. And I think that's what's special about Dr. Orchard. I asked him when I came in here, and I'm like, so many families are coming to me. I don't want to give them all your personal email, but how do you let them talk to somebody that is on the other side, has the knowledge that he has, but also has the personable, ability to give you direction, even if it's not here at his facility, but he's able to, it's the hope, I would say, give you the knowledge to take the next step, but it's just that one step of advice. And
we're more than glad to help. I want to thank you too, 100% from the bottom of my heart, for the work that you're doing to help us and to help our kids, help our community, but also thank you for taking the time to sit down and discuss this.
Appreciate the ability to sit down and chat with you.
Absolutely. I feel the same. Thank you.
So y'all have a blessed day. If you need us, reach out. Thank you so much.